General Jonathan George, welcome to the Unfair Fight.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate you inviting me to participate.
There's no question. I've been so excited to have you on this podcast ever since I found out you were willing to do it. And your background, I think, is something that a lot of America hasn't had enough window into, but they should, because you have an incredible amount of experience, both in the military and our national security infrastructure. And, in this program, we really like to cover a few topics, deep technical, kind of reverse engineering of cyber techniques, but also that kind of intersection of national security, cyber, geopolitics, and, quick background, U-2 pilot, B-1 pilot, B-2 pilot, participate in Afghanistan, National Security Council. Would love to learn a little bit more about kind of how your life started, what brought you into the military, how you ended up, moving to those sort of platforms. I'd love to just pull the thread in those platforms. Obviously, I'm fascinated by aviation and specifically our strategic platforms. And obviously, you know why with my background. So, yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit of how it all got started.
Well, just like you, John, the preponderance of our warriors, they join up strictly for patriotic reasons. They believe in who we are as a people. That doesn't mean that we think that we're perfect, that we can't continue to learn and get better. But at the end of the day, it's patriotism that drives us to defend the opportunity for us to become a better society. In my specific case, this is a little bit unique. Everybody's story is unique. I was born in this county in southern Indiana, 1957. My father, his grandfather were all born and died on the same piece of farm property about 6 miles from here. Now, with that being said, when I retired from the military and came home about 10 years ago, that was I'd only spent 3 years in Indiana at that point. My folks got divorced at a young age. My mother is raised on the remnants of the Comanche, Kiowa, Apache Reservation in southwest Oklahoma. And so when they divorced at 18 months of age, my mother and I went back to Oklahoma. And I think that's what really started to cultivate my interest in patriotism and defending people. As a lot of people realize, Plains Indians, everything revolves around warrior thought, warriorism. And so everybody, men and women both, they consciously, but without being provocative or irritant, they all respected the ability of family members to stand up in the face of adversity. So that, at an early age, I realized that I had kind of a calling, a responsibility to find ways to serve. You can do that teaching. You can do that as a truck driver. There's lots of ways to serve people. In my case, military service fit my personality very well. I like the sense of accountability.
Right.
I like the independence and the drive that you have got to be good, or the stakes are high. People will perish. And so, what really was kind of the tipping point in '79 when we had our own hostages trapped in Iran. I was a college student. It disappointed me that coming out of the hippie generation and the malaise of Vietnam, that enough people my age weren't appearing to stand up for our country. And I thought, I can join the military for 4 or 5 years. I've got lots of family members that had done that. And I'll go find a recruiter. I joined for the 4 or 5 years, and we kept getting into one fight after another. And before you know it, I felt bad that, hey, I'm one of the older guys now. What's that tell all the young ones in the service? That I'm leaving, I'm quitting on you.
That's true.
So 4 or 5 years kind of migrated to a little over 30 years in short order. And as you said, it was preponderance, in my case, of air power.
Right.
But in today's successful military operations are joint and coalition. And so, so I've started off as a T-37 instructor pilot after I got my wings, then went to the Deuce, U-2.
Right.
High altitude work, and from there to the B-1. and then the B-2, and finished up in the RC-135 as far as flying. But,
oh, really? Okay.
Right. At Offutt, I was the commander of the Air Force's largest wing. That's the 55th Wing at Omaha. But interspersed in that were either non-Air Force jobs, Department of Energy for a year, Department of Agriculture for a year, school at Harvard, a little over a year in Afghanistan on the ground as a deputy commanding general of ground forces. Had really little to do with air power, except that air power was a huge part of our success in Afghanistan.
Directing air power, from the ground. That would help quite a bit.
And then, a tour as a White House fellow for President Reagan and then President Bush. And then, as you mentioned, finished up my career at the National Security Council during the first 3 years of President Obama's tour or tenure administration.
Right.
I don't know. I hope it wasn't a tour. I don't think it was, but no, I'm just teasing. So a pretty varied career, even by today's military standards.
For sure.
A lot of exposure to different ways of looking at problems, which is a key to how we're going to be successful here in the future.
For sure. It's absolutely unbelievably impressive resume, and really thank you for all your service as well. I mean, this is why I was so excited to have you on, because that is an absolute breadth of experience. I mean, talk to me a little bit about your time as a U-2 pilot. This platform's obviously quite old, but I hear quite challenging to fly. But I think the other interesting part, and I'd love to hear a little bit, it's as a U-2 pilot, you really get exposed early on to, I would say, national decision making and from an intelligence standpoint. And I'd just love to hear a little bit about the plane, just because I'm fascinated about that, but also a little bit on kind of what you learned about kind of those types of platforms and the national security decision making process.
Yeah, so the Deuce program, U2 program, TR1, is been a huge success for our country. Hasn't been very expensive, and it's produced a tremendous amount of payback. There is not a hot spot in the world today that a Deuce isn't flying overhead, paying attention, collecting information, and transferring it to either service members on the ground or to key decision makers at the White House, State Department, and DoD. It can do both at the same time. Just a phenomenal program. The jet is a blast to fly most of the time. It's a handful. I think it's the first aircraft that had a thruster weight ratio greater than 1-to-1. So you stand it on its tail, it will go supersonic straight up. In the case of the U-2, the wings will fall off because it wasn't made heavy enough.
Really? I had no idea it had that much power.
Yeah, I think the
I
original
pictured it
one,
as a big, slow, high-flying plane, but I guess it has to have a lot of power at that height.
That's right. And I think the motor in it today is about a 20,000-pound thrust motor. Empty weight, the plane probably weighs 17,000 pounds. They have launched off of carriers without a catapult assist. The wings are made so that they will fold up so that you can put them in the lower bay of an aircraft carrier.
This I never knew. This is fascinating.
It is a phenomenal jet. I think to this day, it's the only Air Force aircraft that's never gotten an airworthiness certificate. It doesn't have enough structural components in it to hold it together. And the purpose was Kelly Johnson, the designer of that, of the Deuce, the SR-71, the P-38, the C-130. He knew that in order to get it above the missiles, you had to make it light. In order to make it light, you can't put stuff in it to hold it together. That's why it's got a bicycle landing gear on it. Most of the time, it is a blast to fly. That changes when you get within about 200 feet of the ground because it's designed to fly where there are very few oxygen molecules. Up 70,000 feet is as high as I can say. When you get it down close to the ground, just a 3 or 4 mile an hour breeze causes it to be a bear to land. And topping it off is that almost always you're at the end of a very long, tasking mission. So you're beat when you come back.
Right.
Even if you were to go up and fly, the cockpit pressurization is at 30,000 feet. And so that just has a horrible toll on the human body. Now you get to look forward to coming back and trying to land the world's toughest aircraft to fly. But it's a great jet, great program. I learned early on that you can take a handful of individuals, send them to remote locations, tell them to go collect nationally vital information, and everybody comes together as a team. The flight doctor, chaplain, the ground personnel, the maintenance officer, the 2 or 3 pilots, the commander that goes along, and they just go all over the world, set up shop, and get the job done without much support from anybody else. It's always been kind of the bastard child of the Air Force. It doesn't turn and burn. It doesn't drop big bombs. So
Right.
everybody else kind of looks at it askance. But the teams that go out and collect that information, nobody else would have a clue what's going on if you didn't send the deuce out to figure it out first.
That's fascinating. I saw a video one time when it looked like there was a car driving about 100
Yeah.
or 120 miles an hour right behind the plane, kind of guiding them. I think it was a Camaro when I saw it. It was years ago, but
Yeah. That's just a recruiting tool to get people to come fly the jet. It has
Oh, is
nothing to do with the
it?
program. No, when you come in for a landing, the nose of the plane blocks out the runway. And you've got a
Oh,
space helmet on, so you have very little peripheral vision, which tells you how high to pick your feet up when you walk up steps. You really have a hard time telling how far above the ground that you are. The nose is blocking the runway. You've got this Michelin man looking suit that you're trying to fight in order to
right.
control the plane. And you're going to land on a bicycle arrangement landing gear. Your wings are 100 foot long. They don't have any baffles in them, so that you tip a wing down just a little bit in one direction, all the fuel runs to the wingtip on one
Oh,
side.
really?
All the fuel from the other side runs to the fuselage. And the plane wants to fly anytime you have about 5 knots of wind that comes over the wings. So that pilot, he's called the mobile officer. He'll be the one
Mhm.
that flies the jet tomorrow's mission.
Okay.
He's going to talk you down and give you very precise corrections that you need to be making that you may not be able to see as you're bringing the plane in for a landing. If you're in a no flap situation, you come across the threshold 3 or 4 knots too fast, you won't land the plane. It will glide past a 3-mile runway, and you get to go around and try it again. So it's a handful to get back down on the ground. You've got to stall it out, completely divorce it from aerodynamics,
Right.
about 18 inches to 12 inches above the ground. If you do it any more than that, you're likely to break something on the plane. So
Wow.
you have just about a 6-inch window where you've got to be able to stall the plane, stop it from flying. It falls to the ground, hopefully in the right place on the runway. Mobile officer is there to kind of talk you down and give you the encouragement that you need after a long mission.
That's incredible. Where do you see this going with obviously drones, low
Mhm.
observable drones,
Yep.
satellite? Do you think in time that a manned kind of reconnaissance flights from an imagery or ELINT, or I don't know the package on those
Mhm.
U2s, and we don't need to know.
All,
We'll keep that a secret. But
yeah.
where do you see it going?
Yeah, I personally would like to see it get there sooner than later.
Right.
Now, that's not meant to be an endorsement that I want it to be done prematurely.
Sure.
The Air Force has been trying to do this for 20 years, and they keep finding at the end of the day, hey, it's a lot cheaper to put a human body in the plane and let that guy deal with all of the intricacies than us developing the technology in order to do it from a remote location, a drone.
Sure.
Um, but eventually we'll get there. I just hope that we don't get there before we lose another 2, 3, 4, half dozen U 2 pilots. To this day,
Right.
per flying hour, the U 2 has the highest mortality rate. Um, most of those guys in the last 40 years were friends of mine. And
Unreal.
you hate to have that happen when you know technology, if we pushed it a little harder,
Sure.
could take that person out of a very dangerous situation. Just flying to altitude in the plane is an unhealthy endeavor. Um, But technology is not there yet, and the Air Force
Right.
keeps finding out. Congress helps the Air Force realize that, hey, not yet, dudes.
Right.
Uh,
Kind of like the A-10.
Yeah,
Still
exactly.
working pretty great for
For
close
what
air
it was
ground
designed
support.
to do. That's exactly right. Exactly right.
So kind of, touching on that, obviously, you also flew some strategic platforms. And for those watching, that would really mean nuclear capable platforms, the primary designed mission. Talk to us a little bit about the B-1, the B-2, obviously what you can talk about. I'm sure there's a lot under wraps on that platform as well. Dying to know which one was more enjoyable to fly, kind of what you learned from those. And same question on this, do you see, the answer is probably no, but do you see any of those style platforms moving autonomous?
No, not
Too risky.
anytime soon, because the stakes are so high when you're talking about a strategic platform.
Right.
And I will say that both the B1 and the B2 are very complementary.
Right.
The B2 looks glamorous and sexy as all get out, and just has kind of the same aura that the SR-71 did.
Oh,
Man, that thing looks like something out of this world. When you get in the plane, it's boring to fly it from a pilot standpoint, because it's made to just gently slip through radar sights and not be detected. So you don't get the exhilaration of running to the amusement park and setting your hair on fire.
Sure.
So it's a boring jet to fly, but it does its job spectacularly well. And that is to get past radar, get to the target, put bomb on target, and then get everybody home safely with a minimum number of people at risk. I once had a lieutenant colonel from World War II. They were doing a reunion at Whiteman Air Force Base. So they had about 100 of their aviators and support personnel, mechanics that showed up there. And we gave them a briefing as to a B-2 doing a test run out of the Nevada desert, where one B-2 dropped 16 GPS-guided bombs. This was in 95, 96, so before the JDAM, before GPS had really become a known thing. And in a matter of 10 or 15 seconds, 16 bombs took out 16 Connexes, semi-truck trailers, essentially, over about a 4-mile period. Phenomenal. I mean, it just, unless you are in the realm of armed conflict like you and I have been, you don't realize the impact of that. Anyway, Lieutenant Colonel from World War II stood up at the end of it, and he said, you know what? I was Lieutenant Colonel at the time. So, you know what, Colonel? It would have taken a month worth of us flying B-29s at the end of the war.
Wow.
Putting 20 of them in the sky out of my squadron every single day to have the same impact that one B-2 did in 20 seconds. You only had 2 guys at risk. Every day, 10% of my guys would not come home.
Oh, yeah, and they have tail gunners and everything on those platforms back then, so there's a lot more folks operating it.
That's exactly right. And so, the B-2 is certainly well worth the money. It's not a cheap platform. Well worth the money that our country has invested in it. It gets the job done, and it has proven itself. Now, on the B-1, that's slightly different. That is an exhilarating roller coaster to fly.
Oh, I bet.
To be supersonic on the deck, and when I'm talking on the deck, 40, 50, 60 feet above the ground.
Wow.
It is a blast to fly, and it gets the job done. It was designed to penetrate Soviet radar.
Right.
So in order to penetrate it, you had to get below it, which meant that you'd hug the ground. I have been on training missions in the B-1 where you hook up the radar at night in a snowstorm, in a rainstorm, and the radar set would keep you exactly 200 feet above the ground. You couldn't see anything, overcast, no moonlight, and all you're watching is, like we are right now, looking at the computer, and it's showing you just a line that you're flying, and in front of you, 4 or 5 miles away, 10 miles away, is a 4,000-foot cliff, and all you can do, I mean, you can quit, you can toggle it off, climb to altitude, and say, "Hey, I'm going home.
Right.
Just like that guy did in the first Top Gun movie, where something went wrong. He couldn't land on the carrier, and
Yep.
Maverick had to talk him down. You could do the same thing. You can always pull up and quit. Aviation and the Air Force and the Navy is still a volunteer thing. They can't force you to become a pilot or a navigator, whizzo. But you sit there and you say, man, I hope the engineers that built this, whether they're in California, New Jersey, Long Island, man, I hope they got it right, because there's something big and bad in front of me, and it's getting damn close. So the B-1 just a great plane to fly from a aviator standpoint, but it gets the job done. It can penetrate very, very well. They're getting old, though, and it's time for us to recapitalize on both the B-2 and the B-1.
Yeah, I read that there's a new, I don't know if they're calling it the B-22 or something like that, but a new version of the B-2 coming.
B-21.
Oh, 21. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
You know what's wild? I never realized the B-1, in my mind, I pictured, okay, B-2 replaced it because it's low observable and really low observable. I didn't realize it was designed to go supersonic right near the ground. It kind of, what you're describing kind of reminds me of those Pavlo helicopters, the special operations guys use at night, train hugging, super dangerous. Unbelievable.
Yep. The same thing. As much as those helicopter and those guys are nuts, and I say that with all admiration.
Yes.
When you're doing it at 480 knots, 660 knots, and it's train following radar, it's pretty intense.
That is unbelievable. To your point on the B-2, dropping, kind of 16 precision munitions. Another gentleman we had on this podcast, he's a friend of mine and former Dev Gruer, SEAL Team 6 operator. In the Afghan war, he was talking to, who knows, it might have been you actually at the time, but he was talking to a pilot of a B-2 and said, hey, I need a MOAB dropped, on this ridgeline here. And he's like, why? We can carry unbelievable amounts of JDAMs on here and just kind of take it all out. And he's like, it removed like part of the mountain. It's quite fascinating. So, I know, according to, what I've read up on, you flew some of the earliest kind of strike missions in the Afghan war post 9/11. Is that accurate research on my part?
Not. I don't want to ever distance anybody, particularly a good American. That is not accurate. But I can clarify it.
Okay.
So, excuse me for coughing.
Yeah, I'm getting over COVID myself. So if I'm coughing and keep muting, this is why.
Congratulations. I'm not smart enough to know how to mute it. So you folks will just have to bear with me.
It's all good.
So if I can take that back just a little bit. At the time that September 11th happened, U.S. Strategic Command, kind of the leftover of what used to be the old Strategic Air Command from the Jimmy Stewart days and Curtis LeMay, they were having their annual go to war with special weapons exercise, about a week to 10-day long event, 24 hours a day. You get the jets all ready to go. On the day, so every morning, the senior ranking colonel, the group commander, calls all of the air crews together and they run through the morning briefs, your targets, the weather, your support aircraft, the tankers that are going to be fueling you up, and timing and all of that paraphernalia. So we had just run our morning brief, and the klaxon went off. Klaxon is the siren that says, everybody run to your jet. Simulating we're getting ready to go strike some evil empire somewhere.
Right.
The current, so we left the building. I'm on my squad car, patrolling the flight line, making sure things are going the way they're supposed to. And there's a half dozen to a dozen B-2s that are fully loaded. And they're docks. Unlike a lot of airports and airfields, all B-2s have their own hangar that they're assigned to.
Okay.
And so it keeps everything out of the weather, and plus it's more clandestine that way. The current 4-star at Colorado Springs, he was a major at the time. He came up to me and he said, "Hey, Colonel George, one of the World Trade Towers just got hit." That's not the first time that a big skyscraper in New York's been hit. Empire State Building got smacked by a B-17 back in the late 30s. So
I never knew that.
I immediately thought, well, bad weather in New York, and the airliner got off course, had an emergency, and
Sure.
Sully was not there to land it in the Hudson River. They ran into a World Trade Tower.
Right.
But then Glenn says, Fats is his call sign. I should use his call sign, not his name. Fats said, but it's a clear in a million day, not a cloud in sight. So that immediately, something's not right. An hour later, the second tower got hit. The president was in Florida. He went airborne. There's a close tie between the commander-in-chief and the strategic forces, as you know very well.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And so, we kind of had an idea of where he was and what he was doing, what his schedule was. He went airborne. Off he went to Omaha, to the underground facility at Omaha. And then he went down to Bomber Command, where the headquarters for B-2s and B-1s is, Barksdale Air Force Base. We left the engines running on the jets fully loaded with special weapons for about 12 hours. Now, who in their right mind would pick a fight with the most powerful country in the world when they are in the middle of an exercise designed to turn everything back to glass and nuke them to the Stone Age?
Not a strategic foe.
Right.
They would be too scared of the miscalculation.
So after about 12 hours, there was good intel assessment as to, okay, what's the continuing threat to the heartland of the United States? And exercise was terminated. We downloaded special weapons, and we started building conventional packages. That took about 10 days or so before we were fully transferred so that we could handle anything conventional that might come up.
Right.
In early October, we were given the go-ahead for the Afghanistan missions. I went out to get in the first jet, and the 3-star general at Bomber Command called up and said, "No, colonels don't fly combat missions anymore. Let the young guys do that." So I did not fly. We only flew for 3 nights. I did not fly any of the combat missions. I was the director, the ops group commander that supervised package builds, all of the tankers, the tanker bridge that would have to be put together.
Oh yeah,
all the coordination, and preparing the pilots and the ground personnel in order to get everything pristine and ready to accomplish the mission. Pick who the pilots were going to be and that sort of thing.
Sure.
But I did not fly into the missions.
That must have been disappointing on some level. Once you knew it happened.
Sure was. So finally the 3-star changed his mind. And so, okay, you can go fly. So night 4, I'm out in the jet with the engines running. We're getting ready to taxi, and they canceled the B-2 participation in it because there just weren't any more targets. Literally, the first 2 nights, 2 B-2s, and then special forces on the ground. And, they're just, Afghanistan was a 7th century country. All that's happened now is it's like a 3rd century country. There weren't targets there that were worth hitting. Certainly not worth hitting with the B-2 that's going to fly 44 hours from Missouri all the way halfway around the world to smack some thugs that wouldn't have a clue what was going on.
Can you imagine the amount of money on those missions to blow up not much infrastructure? It's pretty incredible.
Which, John, that's a very good point that a lot of times the American people and our adversaries need to be reminded of. The United States will go to great lengths to do the right thing. Right. And, sometimes we throw caution to the wind, and sometimes we open up the checkbook to prove that our strength of character and our fortitude is bigger than what you had imagined.
Yeah, and it needs to stay that way.
Yeah, right. I agree.
Yeah. So kind of as a transition, after you also spent some time, as you alluded to, on the ground in Afghanistan. When was that in the timeline?
Yeah, so that was our strikes were in 2001.
Right.
I had I had a staff job for General Jumper in his office for a year. B-1 wing commander at Dias Air Force Base in Abilene, Texas. Another staff job at Fighter Command, so to speak, and then off to the 55th Wing at Offutt. Became the wing commander there, flying the RC-135, the OC-135, one 135 after another. We got
a lot of
the
capabilities
alphabet soup
in those
there.
planes.
Yeah, it's phenomenal, and they're old planes, and we need to address that. They're some of them are the earliest 135s that are still in existence. For folks that don't know, the 135 is the same airframe, the 707, that brought President Kennedy's remains home to Washington, D.C. after he was assassinated. And the Air Force is still flying some of this old hardware. It serves well, but it needs to be. We've got more modern aircraft than flying a 707 airframe. And then got shipped off to Afghanistan. It was kind of what had happened was our country had run senior leaders into the ground from the Army and the Marines, and they began looking for people. Hey, can we get a volunteer that can go over and do a general officer's job in Afghanistan and give one of our soldiers or Marines a break? And I said, absolutely, send me over there. I don't know much about ground forces, but I try to be a quick learner, and I'll study up on it in the 8 days I've got to get there from here. And that's what I got, was 8 days.
I have to think you probably made a big impact on air support in that effort, just with your background and knowledge of how to, coordinate all that. I mean, when you're talking about building strike packages, conventional strike packages in the beginning of the war, and there's a lot of logistics that goes into that stuff. I mean, a lot.
You're right. That's an easy thing for an airman to do with much experience at all. Sadly, Afghanistan by 2007, 2008, air power was still valuable, but air power was not going to win the day. If we were trying to nation build, we needed a different approach than just pummeling a society that, by and large, 29.9 million of them are completely innocent. They're just poverty stricken, and they're in the middle of tyranny. That needed a more ground focused effort. So I went over there, and we got boys and girls from the Missouri National Guard that are assigned to teach them how to build a judicial system. 6 months ago, they were in high school, and now they're sent to Afghanistan, and we're going to teach you folks how to build a judicial system, how to
coming out of the Taliban's form of judicial system. That's brutal.
Right, how to build hospitals and things like. I'll give you one brief example. So the DoD set up a number of military hospitals throughout Afghanistan.
Right.
And like most doctors and healthcare professionals, they want to help people. They don't really care if you're a Republican or Democrat, you like the Cowboys or the Patriots. We're here to help. And so one individual, horribly maimed in the leg, one of our U.S. Army doctors patched his leg back together, put all the little bone fragments together so that he would have a usable leg down the road. That Army surgeon went on to the next mobile hospital, 400 or 500 miles away. And the next, and that's when I ended up getting to see this patient. A couple days later, an Afghan trained doctor, which is not saying a whole lot. There are some that are excellent, but by and large, they've been doctored up under trying circumstances. He came in, saw the patient, and said, "Oh, what a horrible, horrible disfigured leg. I've got to clean out all those bone fragments." which resulted in about a week later him losing his leg because there was no bone fragments there to heal back together, to fuse back together, to give the gentleman a chance to walk again. And so, how do you grab somebody from New Hampshire? How do you grab somebody from California who is trained in lethal warfare to go over there and we're going to teach you how to build a society? Right. And so my job was as the deputy commanding general was supervising really nation building.
Wow. Not an easy task.
No. And it wasn't because the Afghan rank and file citizens weren't receptive. They were extremely grateful that we were there.
Right.
I built a lot of friendships with Afghan individuals who were just delighted that we were there. And, now we see that we don't really have much to do to show for it. And I don't know what we could have done differently is the part that gnaws at me every day.
Yeah.
There's some things that we just can't comprehend yet.
Yeah. It's the whole situation over there's tough. I was, Saturday morning, I woke up, flipped on LinkedIn and, the typical Memorial Day, posts were popping up, and I was scrolling through and I saw my buddy's name on a tombstone at Arlington and I couldn't believe it. Right. Yeah. And it turned out, last I saw him, he was retiring. I was working with him at JSOC a bit. He was going to retire. Well, sounds like he didn't, I don't think he joined back up in the military. I think it was more of a special operation, with other agencies. But I don't know how it never hit me, but I found out 3 years later, he was killed on Memorial Day in 2019, in Afghanistan. So yeah, I'm with you on the whole. It's really tough to see how it kind of wrapped up and ended, and unclear. It's hard to the Taliban are resourceful, competent fighters. Yeah, they are, and it's not to be underestimated. I don't think. Right. But and the train is really, really brutal. Really brutal.
It's spectacularly beautiful. Yeah. Which means that it's not where you want to live.
Right. Right.
You're right. It is a tough countryside to just navigate through. Size of Texas. Most of your viewers may not know the size of Texas. If you were to try to drive from El Paso to Texarkana, I forget what that is, 12 or 13 hours. Hell, in Afghanistan, it's 12 or 13 days. Just a rough place to help out.
Yeah, I was telling my wife the other day, I was like, we live up in the mountains at altitude in Colorado. I was like, could you imagine folks flying halfway around the world? And let's say there's a whole indigenous, fighting force that lived here, knew the mountains were, had already built up their red blood cell count to be able to handle the altitude, because that's a big issue too. Could you imagine trying to conduct warfare here? It'd be absolutely brutal. And this is literally what we did. Yeah. And did have a lot of success too.
Yeah. That Glenwood Springs Canyon, flying through it in Afghanistan through the Hindu Kush, Army helicopter warrant officer was flying the machine. I'm in the back and he says, "Hey, General, look at that." And you peer out the window and he said, "The top of that mountain is still 2 miles above us." And, not the Grand Canyon where it's 5,000 feet. I mean, they're talking 10,000 feet and you're already flying at 8,000 or 9,000 feet. So it's once again spectacularly rugged, but not where you really want to live.
Glenwood Canyon's right down the road. I'm driving there this weekend through there. Actually, on my way to Grand Junction for my kids' go-kart race. But
so we ought to get off topic here for just a second.
Yeah,
you ought to be talking to my our youngest son who just came back from spending the winter in mountain safety Summit County. And, just some really interesting stories and experiences there. So a great country where you are. I'd trade places.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. That's right over the pass for me, actually. So very, very cool. You touched on something I had absolutely never heard before, which was we're in the middle of a strategic exercise with planes loaded with, our most powerful weapons we have, the most powerful weapons in the world. When 9/11 happened, it's a really interesting segue into, your time on the National Security Council. I would love for you to describe a bit what you can. Obviously, I'm full respectful of the boundaries on this, but kind of your role in the NSC, because I think as we transition into discussing a bit about, the current situation, Ukraine, Russia, the nuclear saber rattling, I think it's important for the audience to know you didn't just fly strategic platforms. You were very involved in, I think, more.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you're allowed to talk about there, but
I'll have to be. I might be a little stilted here trying to keep track of what should be talked about and what can't be talked about.
Right.
So once again, just another example of where I was very lucky. Coming out of Afghanistan, where did the Air Force push me off to? To the Department of Energy, National Nuclear Security Administration. And that was an interesting year there. An impressive number of patriots who felt like our country had turned our back on strategic warfighting and strategic issues, the nuclear arsenal.
Right.
And, when I got there, people were saying, well, when was the last time we used a nuclear weapon? 1945. Right. And that's not true. Not true at all. Last time one was detonated in anger was 1945. Just a horrible experience, but one that was very necessary. But we use nuclear weapons every single day. And the way we use them is to deter adversaries from doing something that they're going to regret, that the consequences are going to be so bad. And that's called deterrence. And you can't have deterrence. You can't deter people from doing bad things, stupid things, irresponsible things, unless you have the means to hold them accountable. And our nuclear arsenal promises the means of holding bad people accountable. And we see it. I hate to say it because I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin or Adolf Putin or whatever his name needs to be.
He is the modern version of that, isn't he?
Yeah. Just, a very emotional topic to try to describe him. But he, for the sake of him, I think too many of our fellow citizens would have bought into strategic issues really aren't that big a deal. We don't really use them. And Putin has proven that deterrence works. The only thing that prevents the free world from just smacking him into oblivion is that he's got a nuclear arsenal that is sophisticated and it works.
Yeah.
And we know it.
Yep.
The rest of Russia, they're darn near locked in the dark ages. Very poorly positioned to do anything. But they realize the value of nuclear weapons, and they have put their nation's treasure in making sure that their nuclear weapons are formidable. And so he's got the license to run around and do horrible things because he's got the nuclear bullets in his holster. And he has learned how to play that. This is nothing more than really playing poker.
Yeah.
He has learned how to bluff and to call our hands and to raise the stakes. And he knows he gets away with it because he's got nuclear weapons.
It's the golden hammer. It really does.
Yeah, you're right. And so my primary responsibility when I went to the National Security Council immediately after Barack Obama became the commander-in-chief was to drive the policy for strategic capabilities. And that was not a fun posting to have. I have great respect to all of the commander-in-chiefs that I met, from Reagan to Bush, to Clinton to Bush, and Obama, are impressive leaders. I really can't fault any of them. I'm grateful that our country was able to push them to our leadership positions of commander-in-chief. But his administration was not elected in order to build a nuclear stockpile or to reinvigorate a nuclear stockpile. His administration was pretty much elected to do other domestic things, and we need to find money where we can. Already during President George Bush's administration, the amount of money that was invested in the nuclear stockpile was dropping by about 5 to 10% every year.
Oh, wow.
So this was not just a Democrat or Republican thing. America had become lazy, realizing that what deterrence is, how important it is, and what makes deterrence work.
Right.
So, I walked in almost on day one to a team of folks that we want to get rid of all nuclear weapons. I dream. Let me think if I can recall how the president put this. I dream of the peace and security of a world free of nuclear weapons.
Right.
Well,
I remember this. It was a big public talking point.
Yeah, at Prague, he made that comment in a speech at Prague.
Right.
Just a beautiful, beautiful speech, but not that I should be in a position to judge. And this one phrase, rather naive.
Right.
Maybe a good selling point to get the political backing that you need. He's got to do
Sure.
that. But as far as from a warfighting standpoint, it not the most useful thing that you can say. One, because the evidence is that since 1945, the number of people that have died in armed conflict have diminished compared to what it was prior to 1945. And the one constant is nuclear weapons. It scares the shit out of people, so we're not going to go there.
Right.
And when you stop being able to scare people, bad things begin to pop up. And I think some of our problems we've seen in the last few years is that they don't trust that we're as strong as we really are.